Sam Amidon, what a goofball.
That's the second time I've been called a goofball in the past week.
Well, I like it. It's like the first time you can imagine Doc Boggs coming down the road and running into Sun Ra. Hey, let's pick.
Let's jam. They would have done it.
That would be a thing. Well, listen, welcome back. It's great to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
Congratulations, new batch of songs.
Thank you.
Always pushing the envelope. I want to ask you a little bit about rhythm and pulse and time signature and feel. There's certain kinds of music. For me, it's probably mostly African music where I get surprised when I finally figure out sort of where the downbeat is. You know, it's like the song can be well on its way before, and then it's like looking at something and you know finally perceiving
the little shift.
Yeah, is that something that you discovered that you could? Was that like a puzzle you could solve when you were younger, or is that something you chase? Because I know you dabble
rhythm is
in that.
important. I think that it was something that came from because as you said, I was growing up playing the fiddle. And I first was into New England fiddle playing, which is sort of a mix of French, Canadian, and Irish styles. And then I really got driven towards the Irish music. And then later on, I got into old-time music. And when you learn all those different styles on the fiddle, each one is like an alternate universe unto itself, you know? And a lot of that is the feeling of the rhythm. Yeah. And obviously, in each case, you can play along at the same tempo to a metronome. But what's happening in between one beat and the next is totally different and unquantifiable. And so as I've progressed into other music, I think I've still been curious about that personal quality of rhythm.
Yeah. Well, I know, and tell me if I got this right, but the making of this latest record, it started out in a session in New York, mostly with the percussion, right?
It was a free improvisation, day of free improvisation. I didn't do it looking for an end. I just did it to kind of clear the decks. And I brought Shahzada Smiley, who plays electronics and guitar, and a wonderful saxophonist named Sam Gendel, and myself on all my instruments. And then the sort of special guest was Milford Graves, who's a legendary free jazz drummer from the early 60s. He has studied all these different styles, and he kind of plays them in this insane way that's sort of all at once. And he's also an acupuncturist and records people's heartbeats. He's this incredible person. And
a professor, too.
And a professor at Bennington for like 30 years. Yeah. He's just like a wise master of his own universe.
Yeah.
And we brought him, and so we just sort of played, and it was a mess, and a beautiful, wild mess. And the last 10 minutes of the record is the last 10 minutes of that improvisational session. And then the whole first part of the record is much more song-based, but still uses elements that we gathered from that day.
Let me ask you about that sort of that crazy free improv jazz day, or improv day. So the casting is critical. So you found people that you imagined you could communicate with and listen to, and then did you have a structure or a song or a concept or a theme or anything? You just like, let's get in the room and we'll just start making some noise.
I had a couple little bits that I brought, just a couple melodies. But it was pretty open. Yeah. And but I did things. Yeah, we did other stuff that didn't, that's not on the album. That was just playful. I sang a Shags song. I don't know if people know. If you don't, you should check out their album Philosophy of the World. There's things that to me made a little connection to Milford. And I talked with him about the Kentucky fiddle style and the way that all those fiddlers, they have that. I was exaggerating it here, but that kind of Kentucky intonation where it's that open tuning. And there's like the third and the seventh, that da da da, that's like, I don't know, I can't sing it here, but just that kind of intonation. And Milford was very curious about that. He's very curious about traditions and what they're doing that is different, that's ancient.
Luther Strong, is that one of those Kentucky fiddlers?
Absolutely.
Yeah, those guys. I mean, anyway, I think it's, and probably some of it was terrible.
Oh, it was not even, we weren't even thinking that way. Yeah. It wasn't a question of what was good or bad really to that day. It was just like what was just to open yourself up and go without fear into the unknown. And then, the question of what was released, what other people would want to hear was definitely, right. But that's something that's sort of shared between free improvisation and folk music. I'll listen to 12 hours of traditional Irish fiddle tunes with no arrangement, but not everybody wants to listen to that, right. But that is what you would do if you join with your friends to play Irish tunes. Yeah. You just sit there. You don't worry about making it listenable. You're playing for each other.
It's an experience.
Yeah, it's a listening thing.
Yeah. And then so you took those tapes back to London, and then you worked with a producer who helped you.
Yeah, I worked with Leo Abrahams, and Shahzada Smiley is still involved as well. and really it was just he's sort of a protege of Brian Eno's, and he sort of has that way of like just tricking you in opening up your creativity in different ways. So he would just make a little loop of something that didn't even maybe end up on the record, but that caused me to write something else and sing on top, and it was cool. I would drop the kids off at school, go to his house, make super weird music all day long, and then pick them up, take them to, whatever.
Well, let me ask you about that, because for so many people that's a challenge. The idea the family music world, and you've got it doubly because your wife's also got a career.
Two free touring schedules.
Yeah, so aligning all those things plus raising kids, but you've got to figure it out.
Well, I wouldn't say we have it figured out. But each stage is a new era of trying to figuring it out.
You get your calendars out and you say, well, let's take a look at May.
Yeah, exactly. You were what? Yeah.
And when you think about the collaborations, you always, as I mentioned, casting is kind of important. You think about these collaborations where other players and other musicians inspire you. Do you have a list of people, or is it just kind of things you discover as you're listening and you say, wow, I'd love to try something with that
It's a
person?
combination of fantasies of imagining things in terms of listening to music, and stuff that just comes through happenstance, and connection. Like Shahzad just was like, oh, had they told me he'd been in communication with Milford, and I thought, well, that could be interesting. And for me, like, my favorite activity in the whole world is listening to music, and almost, not to say more than playing, but like it's a particular, and like listening to all the different kind of albums, and seeing people play. And so a lot of stuff on my albums is me thinking as a listener, like, oh man, like what if you had, in the case of Lilio, the last album, it was like Bill Frisell with Chris, this drummer, and Shahzad, like put those guys together and just bring him to Iceland and see what happens. So sometimes it's just me as a wanting to hear, like, what would he play if he had a beat like that under him. And in this case it was similar. It was like, man, Milford, what he does, people think of it as this experimental thing, but really it's very connected to ancient rhythmic traditions. And so what if I brought some of that kind of fiddle, what I love from the fiddle music, and sort of mix that in with what Milford does.
So do you have a little notebook where you say, okay, well, this is something I heard, and do you have any, who are some names on your future collaboration list?
Oh, Jimi Hendrix, but it's so weird he has not gotten back to at least, he was getting back at first, and he hasn't responded to the last 6 emails, so I'm going to keep at it, though, because it's possible he's just on tour. People, like, sometimes you're like, maybe they don't want to talk to me or something, but you can always assume that that's just, you hope for the best.
Especially you could channel stuff like that.
But we had Juma Sultan on this record, who played percussion at Woodstock and in Hendrix's band for a year, and he brought a whole different energy than Milford. Milford has a real intensity, and Juma came later in the day with this very gentle spirit and played some percussion on the Juma Mountain song that I named for him.
Wow, amazing. Well, Sam, I love your adventurousness. I love your sort of wild, reckless abandon, and it's not totally reckless, but it's open.
Thank you.
And well, listen, let's get back to some more music, and thanks again for coming back. Welcome back, if you would, Sam Amidon.
Railroad comes, we'll take a ride. Here we go, side by side. Here we go, side by side. Johnny come picking on the banjo. Boop, sugar, boop.